All right. What is going on, one and all? I'm just hanging out here on this Wednesday evening. Hope all is going well. I am still playing with all of this. And figuring out how all of this works in terms of both the technological side as well as my flows. I made a commitment a while back that I was going to post every day as I really move into this content creator influencer. I feel like there's a better word for what it is that I do. Wizard. And really want to honor that commitment because I'm someone, as much as I can from where I am at, attempt to do what it is that I say. And so my commitment to post something every day, except for Saturdays. Saturday's my day off. I feel like it's a good opportunity to introduce this concept of Wanderful Wonderings. I was speaking with someone today about this collective awakening process and how it is something that there's a lot of assets that we have. There are things that can really help and support us as we move through areas of high uncertainty. And one of them that I find is sort of almost like a mantra: walking in wonder, wandering in my walks. And so that's sort of this concept behind Wanderful Wonderings is, sort of non-linear thought met with openness, non-judgment, and willingness. And so as all of that transpires, it's something that really is useful, because as we look at the whole awakening process, right, we talk a lot about that. However, what is the actual awakening process like? From my perspective, it's a cycle that we're always and ever in a state of. So this concept of being woke is not actually true, because we're not fully woke, because there are parts of ourself held within ourselves that we are continually awakening to. And so awakening, meaning that we are becoming more aware of something. And often I look at it in terms of not, physically sleeping. On one side, we are in our ego, which often gets a bad rap, and it's really not. It is the identity we've created. Kiolamau, right, is an identity. Well, Kiolamau is a little different. Kiolamau is a mantle. Michael. So my English name is Michael. I've been Michael for years. Before that, I was Mike, right? And these are identities that we have created. It actually gets really trippy when we look at the legal designation of it, which is an entirely another conversation. However, we're going from this place of ego identity, more of our humanism, this terrestrial self, if you will, and into our essence. And we can do that in these different aspects: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of ourselves. So it's a process, right? We have on one side our third dimensional mental identity. This is sort of our download. When we talk about our higher self, this is what enters into our second dimensional physical body. Third dimensional mental body, higher self, second dimensional physical body. And this is where we have things coming in terms of like genetics, epigenetics, ancestral lines. All of those things is in, physical body. That second dimensional body is very specific to what it governs, what it oversees. We see this in our central nervous system, our autonomic nervous system. The The physical characteristics of me comes from my father being Okinawan and my mother being Hawaiian Portuguese, right? I got the height of the Portuguese, thanks Portuguese family. I've got like the shoulders of the Hawaiian side, and then I have the looks of the Okinawan. And so that comes in from my lineage. Whereas my mental body, when we talk about the higher self, is more incarnational identity. That's something else entirely. And so, right, it's downloading into the body. And that's where we have this combination, right? And this combination then comes into play because there are sort of like getting a car, right? There's certain things that are just sort of factory setting, right? And that's sort of the body, the D2, physical body's intelligence, which is a little different than the driver, if you will, which is the mental body system. And so as we go through this, then there's lots of things that we are awakening to, both incarnational and ancestral lines. There can be things in terms of, for example, I was raised without my dad. He wasn't around from about 4.5 or so. And when he was around, he was what I like to identify as the trifecta of stoicism. He was Asian, he was a martial artist, he was a military man. So he didn't talk about shit. And so he wasn't really around. So it wasn't necessarily someone who modeled a behavior. And when he was around, he tended to yell because he got frustrated at my brother and I. However, where did I learn this whole concept of stoicism? Because that's something that I've dealt with through the entirety of my life. It's something that I'm very conscientious about. I continue to work on self-expression. I continue to model that for the boys. I ask them 3-4 times a day, oh, how are you guys feeling? What are you feeling? We'll go through that again and again. And I'll start off by saying how I feel, what I'm feeling. I am in therapy. I do shit like this to talk about things so I can ramble, self-expression, because that's something that my father didn't necessarily have in his life. That's something that his father didn't necessarily have in his life. And even though grandpa and dad weren't really a part of my upbringing as much, there's still that aspect of withdrawing, that withdrawal, that tendency to not say. Now, as that comes into play, that's an example of an ancestral line. Part of my awakening process often came in relationships and not being forthcoming or talking about things, feeling that the masculine piece of just being quiet and, manning up and this, that, and the other has been a while in terms of the dissolving of those strands, that belief. Whereas the incarnational piece comes into play in terms of working with certain kinds of people in their own transformative process. That's something that, my ancestral line, my dad, my mom, those figures in my life, that's not a part of their, we say in Hawaiian, kuleana, their responsibility, their privilege to do. That's not a part of their sort of niche in life. However, in different incarnations, different versions of me, this is just what I do, because this is a part of the energy that I embody and that I ultimately originate from. So as we look at this, then, two really strong lines. I mean, if you look at my ancestry, I have like a huge poster that goes back over 1,000 years to my lineage in Tahiti, warriors here in Hawaii, and all the way up. Small, tiny little, like 8 size font that just goes all the way back. And then there's the incarnational piece. I've been around for a time. I mean, I have memories way back when. And so, as such, this whole awakening process then is really a process. And we'll go through generally 4 distinctive stages. The first stage is the initiation process, and that initiates the change for sure. However, it's also a rite of passage. It is something that we go through largely when there is an abrupt change or shift in our worldview. And that is not, it doesn't just happen, it has been ongoing. There's been things that have been happening beneath the surface, and we're generally not aware of it. However, as we become aware of it, then all of a sudden we have a choice to make. And that takes us into the second stage of a reckoning. The reckoning is very much like it sounds. We have choices to make and responsibility to take. And in that, then, if we choose in doing the same old shit, then we go back into our initiations and more things happen, energy builds, and it kind of blows up in our face. And then we have, again, choices to make, and they're often the same choices. Yet when we make that choice to do something differently, move away from the choice that reaffirms the ego, the identity that we've created. And the thing about that spectrum of ego and essence is that ego is an identity that largely, majority of it is created by age 4, though it can go up to about 80% of it by age 8. And we'll have these other canon events, things that happen through the course of our life that can dramatically impact that aspect of ego, which comes from the subconscious mind. And when it happens, these happenings can affect our emotions, our beliefs, our dominant thought patterns in terms of all that chatter that we have often in our head, and can be something that is very powerful in our decision-making process. So as we move away from that, which is effectively, we developed it out of a need to survive, right? Kind of in that line of stoicism, there was also this aspect of not being seen, not being heard. My parents would fight often, not physically, verbally though. They definitely had some pipes, and I would make myself small. As a child, I would attempt to just shut my mouth so that I wouldn't disrupt or disturb. And instead, I would be quiet. And so there'd be this thing of wanting no one to hear me, desiring no one to see me. And so that also became a pattern beneath the surface, subconscious mind holding on to this story that if I just shut my mouth, everything will be okay. Which at this point in time really is not an issue. Like I've gone through a whole process in my own awakening with this specific aspect of being seen, being heard. When I really became aware of this back in 2009 and 10, then I went out of my way to speak. My reckoning was that I could continue to choose to be quiet, to be silent, to be unseen and unheard, or I could confront that. And so I did. Kind of signed up for any opportunity to speak publicly. And so I actually made it part of my career at that time. From 2011 to 2014, I was doing professional speaking. Because damn, did the fear response trigger on that. Being able to be in front of people, let alone sharing stories like this, was just something that was highly uncomfortable. And yet I continued to do it because I could feel it viscerally in my body. Like it was just, my shoulders would shrug up, my heart would beat, felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. And so I kept on doing it, heading towards the chaos. And as I did, I moved from that reckoning into the stage 3, which is the emergence. I started to realize that I was actually a really good fucking speaker. In fact, in one of my presentations, one of the persons that was there, I was doing like a Wellness Wednesday at an organization. And one of the persons there, this was in a room of like 25 people, approached me afterwards and was just really commenting on how terrific of a speaker I was. And I was still in my stuff, I was being very hypercritical. And I was like, oh, thank you. And she's like, no, like really, your style is very natural, it's very relatable, and she happened to be a public speaker. So she was giving me a lot of not just fluff, actual feedback. And that changed things, because then I started to realize that, well, if this is coming from sort of an impartial person who, this is what they do, well, then maybe there is something there. And so all of a sudden, I felt kind of excited by it. It's like, well, maybe I am a good speaker. Maybe I do have something to say. And maybe what it is that I have to say is valuable to someone, to more than someone, And as that started to happen, it became a practice. I continued to do it. I continued to refine, started to take out all the ums and the uhs and the long pauses, and I just allowed silence to be silence. And so as I did this practice, if you will, of my presence, because this was not something that I egoically, naturally liked, let alone enjoyed. And then I did. And so as I continued to make it a practice of my presence, it took me into this last stage, which is the integration. And the integration is when we can actually start to create a sort of discipline, because generally speaking, it's not something that comes, well, I'm not going to say it doesn't come natural. We don't naturally do it because our ego doesn't like it. And so as we begin to, though, all of a sudden things begin to change. And that thing that changes is us. And as we begin to shift and as we begin to change and we move through this aspect, we can also simultaneously be experiencing an initiation in finance. We could be in our emergence, in our intuition. We could be at the crossroads of a decision in relationships. And so it's an ongoing process, because all of this that's in the depth and the breadth of the subconscious mind, largely tied to ego identity, is a very deep well. And so well is a lot of this hidden, that it takes us being able to acknowledge how the patterns of our past, as they make themselves known in our present moment, really just melt away when beheld in our presence. And so this awakening process is ongoing. There's so many things. I mean, decades, centuries, millennia on our ancestral line, lifetimes in our incarnational lines. And it's interesting to look at that, because the process of us, which effectively is all of us making our way home, that's one as well for another day. It ties into, though, being able to move through these areas of hurt, of story, of emotion, of experience. And as we continue to do so, it's something that can be truly not just powerful, empowering for ourselves and for those around us. I know that my children will be able to feel into their experience, to be able to say openly, I love you, to honor the people that they are with, because the container that I hold for them is the same container I hold for myself. And that's one that is open and allowing, inviting, and excitable, playful, and incredibly deep. So as we go through all of this together, rounding back to close, I find that walking in wonder, that first portion of it, to just remain curious. Pretend as if I don't know shit. You know, there's a book called The Bowl of Light, which is a incredible book by I forget his name, but it's about a kahu here, Hale Makua, who is an incredible spiritual leader. And he talks about the bowl of light, like a bowl, like a wooden bowl. And, you know, when it's filled, there's no room for anything else. It could be filled with rocks. It could be filled with water. However, once we empty these contents, then we have choices to make on how we want to refill this bowl. And so I invite you to consider that as you walk in wonder, without prejudging the world around you and being very open with the world within. Because as we do, just remain curious. And as we go through this awakening process, shit's going to get weird. Shit's going to get really weird for a lot of people. Yet that high degree of uncertainty, this level of strangeness, will be so disruptive. And as we wander in our walks, just allowing ourselves the spaciousness to explore, to adventure, to just be present with where we are. We don't necessarily have to have a destination. Don't get me wrong. Vision crafting and working with that level of being able to peek into through space and time and to see a specific moment and to intend to move in that direction is phenomenal. And firm in intention, flexible in approach. Perhaps the fact that we are here to walk, that we're showing up, is enough. And on that note, it is time for me to bow out. I got stuff to do tomorrow. All right. That is it for now. Love and aloha. Take care.